Hello. I wanted to sort of discuss kind of disclosure really and where we are at the moment, and everything's feeling like quite positive, and there's just a lot of things kind of going on at the moment. Obviously, there's a kind of the Nazca mummy thing that I've kind of been reporting on, and you kind of begs the question whether that would have happened, 5 years ago. Potentially, there'll be system control and suppression happening, and whether because that information is coming out, whether those sort of systems of control maybe they are disintegrating. And the same with sort of Mount Adams as well. That's kind of amazing sort of situation occurring with the entranceway opening up in potentially into inner Earth, or some sort of spaceport, and whether that's a signifier for the larger things that are going on at the moment. Um, as kind of I was researching Mount Adams, I was sort of listening to James Gilliland's radio show, and he was sort of discussing a particular anonymous video that had been released, which I was a bit late to the table on. It came out sort of end of June, and I've only recently just seen it, but it is quite amazing, really positive, gave a really good sort of timeline of things that are happening and the kind of key players involved in it. There was, I mean, anonymous are hard because there's so many kind of splinter groups. It's hard to know which is the true kind of coherent voice. Because there was another anonymous video I did see for part of Anonymous Global, was their YouTube channel, and it was very kind of negative and basically painted ET as being invaders and they're about to sort of take over the earth at any point, and we have to be prepared sort of militarily. So all kind of things I don't really agree with. And obviously, yeah, there are potentially negative influences, but not to that degree. I mean, if they wanted to invade, they would have done that a long time ago. And just so the anonymous video that I saw, I mean, I will post a link to this, was just like I said, a really good kind of potted history of like where we are at the moment. So it kind of went into sort of the WikiLeaks. Obviously we know about in terms of John Podesta and Hillary Clinton, and sort of highlighted a particular email that Podesta had sent to Edgar Mitchell, and they were discussing how the war in space is kind of ramping up, which I don't quite know what that means. And then obviously the famous sort of Podesta tweet that he sort of sent out after leaving office, he was saying one of his biggest regrets was not securing disclosure of sort of UFOs. So that's a big kind of red flag to, potential kind of mainstream politicians sort of actually admitting that, there are ETs and there are sort of UFOs. But they also sort of talked about how Hillary Clinton during a presidential campaign was going to send like a task force into Area 51. And she just sort of aligned herself with kind of a Lawrence Rockefeller, as they always had done. And there was a Rockefeller initiative, and his whole idea was to sort of apply for Air Force and sort of Navy and government officers to release all their UFO files. And it's just another example of basically them trying to set the agenda. They're trying to disclose the information in their favor just to maintain their power structure, which they have done for, an incredibly long time now. So that's something we really need to resist. We need the full truth, and it doesn't need to be filtered through the Rockefellers, because it's going to be skewed and it's going to be, work in their favor. And also part of the video, they sort of discuss kind of Seth Rich, and he's like potentially the person who leaked all the 44,000 emails to WikiLeaks. And they also highlighted how, like in this video, that John Podesta had sent an email to one of his colleagues saying that he wanted to, make an example of the leaker. And as we know, Seth Rich potentially was murdered for his leaking this information, which is really unfortunate. I mean, the kind of the WikiLeaks were a big revelation, because it really kind of confirmed like the elite involvement in sort of child trafficking and sort of paedophilia and sort of ritualistic sort of satanic worshipping. And there were a lot of kind of code words in the emails that kind of linked to those particular activities, and it was really kind of shocking. And even Hillary Clinton was sort of sent an email, and she kind of highlighted, I'm going to sacrifice a chicken to Moloch. And chicken apparently is a code word for boy lover, and Moloch is like the pagan god for sort of child sacrifice. So incredibly disturbing stuff. And to think that sort of mainstream politicians are kind of involved in this, and WikiLeaks have sort of really just highlighted what actually is kind of going on. Then in the video, they sort of move into kind of areas you already know about, in terms of like Carol Rosin, who was a sort of assistant of Werner von Braun. Obviously, he was the kind of the Nazi sort of rocket scientist, and on his deathbed, he purported to have said that, the deep state has always wanted to create enemies, and the first enemies will, be rogue nations, such as Iraq and Syria, which, they've obviously gone in and invaded. And the second is, terrorism, which obviously we know about. And the third threat that they're going to try and engineer is like the alien threat to sort of hoax kind of an alien invasion. And in this video, they were sort of saying that idea has been so overexposed and so many people know about it that actually they've sort of scrapped that plan kind of altogether, and they've devised a new one. And this is what they do, they just keep going. If they realize something's been too overexposed, they just tweak it and they change direction slightly, again, to benefit their own sort of agendas. But the new plan was to disclose, the fact that we're not alone, but actually to have like ET contact and them sort of create like a new world religion in cahoots with the Vatican as well. And again, it's just that essentially, this anonymous video was exposing that new plan about how they're going to create this kind of world religion. And again, it was all going through the sort of Rockefellers, all through the kind of the deep state kind of paradigm, which is, disclosure should be for the people. They also then sort of talked about kind of Alex Jones and his work and how he sort of broke into sort of Bohemian Grove. And again, that was another entry point into understanding actually what some of these elite politicians are involved in. And Bohemian Grove is this kind of weird retreat that they go to every year, and they have a weird ceremony where they burn an effigy of a child, again, to this kind of pagan god Moloch. And Alex Jones exposed that. There was a video of that. You can find that on YouTube. But they also talk about him exposing kind of the Federal Reserve and the kind of the fraudulent institution that it is. And also just, again, going into kind of the child trafficking, mainstream media, and, pedogate, and how that is all kind of interlinked, and his kind of work. And then, unfortunately, one of the main characters that came out of the kind of pedogate was an individual called James Fantis, and he essentially owned this kind of restaurant called Comet kind of Ping Pong. And Alex Jones recently sort of apologized for exposing him as a paedophile, and Anonymous goes on to sort of say that he did that because he was threatened. His family was threatened. Him and his family were threatened, and that is why he ended up sort of apologizing to him. And of course, as we know, he's had a recent custody battle with his ex-wife, and he apologized to help him not lose custody for his children, basically. So again, that kind of points towards that he's been threatened, and that's how he's kind of changed his tune in a lot of ways, which is really unfortunate, but you can kind of completely understand why he did that. But at the end of the film, they sort of really had quite a positive message about how the fact Anonymous had sort of gathered the biggest, hack ever, and they were sat on an enormous wealth of information. And once it's released, it will basically just expose everything, and how they are really just biding their time, looking for the right moment to release this information so it has the maximum effect. And literally just everyone then realizes how they've been lied to, how our history's been, been made up, how we just don't understand our true origins, how we're in this like money kind of slave sort of system, about the pedophilia, about the sort of suppression of technologies, about the suppression, about knowledge to do with extraterrestrials, like literally everything. So it's a really positive thing that the Alliance are potentially winning, and they are waiting, biding their time to find the right moment to release this big data dump. And as that kind of data dump happens, everyone will realize, the crimes against humanity that have occurred, by individuals and kind of institutions, corporations, and cartels. And, it will expose essentially all of that. Also goes into some really big revelations. I try not to sort of kind of rubbish other kind of researchers because there's a lot of disinformation out there, but I feel it's quite important. But they sort of talk about Dr. Greer and how he's been compromised. Essentially, they got some very compromising photos on him, and now he's been given the code name sort of DC Wolf. So he's basically working with the military-industrial complex to sort of control disclosure. They're sort of essentially engineering him as being one of the head points to their type of disclosure that they want. And there's also been news stories that they talk about in Anonymous about how he's been embezzling a lot of the money that that was kind of earned through the Sirius documentary and the recent one unacknowledged, and apparently some former employees also confirmed that as well. Again, this completely could be sort of false information and disinformation, but I thought it kind of important to talk about. And if it's true, obviously that would be incredibly sad, because he was a personal entry point for me into this kind of community as well. So that would be very sad if that is actually true. But again, it could be completely disinformation. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I was kind of listening to James Gilliland. That's how I sort of heard about the anonymous video that I've just been discussing. But on his radio show, it was kind of slightly after kind of ESETI conference that he had. And he was just jubilant, actually. He was sort of saying how much is going on at the moment and how positive it is. And he's saying that, the alliance is sort of winning, the cabal is going down. And he's sort of talking about how there's going to be a new currency, and with a view then really to move towards a moneyless sort of cashless society, not in the terms of it being all computerized, but literally having no money at all. And as a lot of us know, the kind of money system is essentially like a form of enslavement. So it's important to kind of move towards not using that kind of system. And also, again, reiterates the whole kind of pedo arrest that's going on at the moment, and how that's kind of key to it, like how these kind of arrests are then going to expose all this information we want to kind of have revealed, and how it's going to be quite shocking. Especially to people that haven't been reading about this. It's going to involve quite mainstream politicians. It's going to involve kind of sort of quite mainstream sort of celebrities as well. So it's going to be quite shocking, the people involved and the secrecy that's happened. Also, James Gilliland's sort of message is always really nice, and he just sort of say, don't look for an external savior, don't look for an ET that's going to solve this, or like one particular individual or a politician especially. It's all going to come within. So you look within yourself, you are your own savior. You have to enlighten yourself with kind of knowledge, and through everyone doing that, that is going to help disclosure. And that's what kind of ET want. They don't want your money and they don't want your worship. They want you to sort of look within yourself and see how all powerful you are. So again, it was an incredibly sort of uplifting kind of message to say. But also he was sort of discussing how, the energies on the planet itself, as we know, are completely changing as well. So it's going to be really difficult to live in fear or denial, just because the energies around just aren't conducive with that kind of environment. So again, things are going to change energetically as well. And that's really going to affect us spiritually. And he was just sort of saying how much of a shame it is that a lot of people now kind of ignore kind of ancient wisdom, and how he sort of says the ancient wisdom is there to sort of give you guideposts and what our kind of true origins are, and previously in the modern day world there has been a sense that just completely disregarded it and sort of created our own reality, and that has been wrong. And actually there's a lot of wisdom to be sought from that kind of ancient sort of teaching, ancient knowledge. And so we should be focusing on that again. And then also he had a big revelation about there's a huge historical find. He didn't give too much details about it, but he was basically sort of saying that they found these like metal tablets, which literally just are a game changer, and again reset all our knowledge about what we know and about the true teaching of Jesus. And they involve the Anunnaki, and then the entities with the sort of the tall kind of cone heads, and how they sort of came in, and there was like a natural man sort of developing on this planet, but they sort of came in and sort of messed with their DNA and essentially gave their own DNA into humanity. And this has happened frequent time. Apparently it's like 12 star nations have tinkered with our DNA. And so again, this information, this tablet sort of like details that information, and about, it's not just us, it's like literally the whole like animal life and even plant life has been terraformed in this planet, and how we actually are so important because all these star nations have been involved. And so in a lot of ways we're quite special. So that's why it's really important that we kind of get rid of this sort of system of control. But he did mention the Anunnaki. There were different sort of groups involved, and some were negative and some were positive. And the ones that were positive, they sort of came here, tinkered with DNA, and also kind of like imparted their technology. But there were some that were quite negative, and they wanted humans essentially to kind of worship them as well. So that was a kind of negative influence on this planet. And they were James also discussed how the Lemurians in Lemuria, they actually just disregarded any kind of attempt for these Anunnaki to get them to worship them. But what unfortunately happened in Numeria and also Atlantis, then a lot of dark souls reincarnated into these sort of societies, and they started to create divisions, and they started to create like a culture of technology worship, and then using technology as a form of control. And then entities would then start to feed on the pain and hurt of humanity. And obviously that kind of scenario is very similar to what's happening now. People's kind of worshipping technology. I mean, the amount of time I spend on a computer is kind of crazy, and I look forward maybe to that time when I don't have to. But yeah, that kind of definitely resonates a lot, especially with smartphones as well. Everyone kind of glued to their smartphones like zombies. So yeah, that definitely resonates with kind of current situation at the moment. So he kind of discusses that. But he sort of, again, really positive message about how, it's all going to be cleaned up. Like there's all these like higher level beings, not just within this reality, but also other dimensions. He talks about fourth, fifth, sixth, all the way up to 13th. They're all coming to this planet to help clean up the energy that's happening and to help push, the sort of rest of the history of Earth into a really positive, enlightened phase. And he was just discussing that, a part of your enlightenment, you should really sort of understand the kind of energies, the sort of negative energies that affect us and this planet, and learn about things like the draconian grid and also the Archon network, and how these units have been used for hundreds and hundreds of years to control us. So again, hopefully that's kind of lifting, which is a really massively positive message. Sort of moving away from James Gilliland, I sort of noticed that Corey Goode has also been discussing a lot to do with like a lot of cosmic energies being hitting the planet and how that's physically going to affect us in terms of